Today I'm going to show you some tips about removing wheel bearings. On some of the wheels used on Trials motorcycles, there is a sleeve between the bearings which has shoulders that actually go into the bearing races, and with this type of design it's not possible to tap through with a drift to get the opposite bearing out and then flip the wheel over and get the other one. So what I do is I take a large washer, I stand it on end on one of the bearings, and then I take my MIG welder and I securely weld that washer to that inner bearing race, keeping that washer standing on end there. Then I use a simple auto body type slide hammer that has a weight that you pull that gives you that impact, letting the weld cool for a little bit so that it's secure. Then I have this slide hammer hooked onto that washer, a few pulls and the bearing is out. There is a spacer there that goes behind the bearing, and that's just to help guide the center sleeve and keep it centered during assembly. Take note of how your different parts go in and keep track of those. Clean everything, and then you can see that I turn the wheel over. Then I very carefully tap out that center sleeve with a drift. And when you're doing these things, some of these parts you're going to reuse. Be careful if you put a little ding in there or something. That'll make your axle harder to put through later on. So be sure that you take a rat tail file and kind of clean up these parts inside. Make sure there's no burrs hanging over in there. That way when you go to reassemble your bike, your axle will go through the wheel smoothly. Now I will reach through and tap out the opposite bearing with a bronze drift there, and it comes right out. And it also has a spacer, just like on the other side, that keeps the bearing in the correct location and helps guide that center sleeve, keeping it centered during assembly. And I take a wire brush on my hand drill and clean all the areas around in there where those parts are and where the bearings sit, getting all that very clean. Use a solvent, whatever. And then I use a little bit of compressed air when I'm all done to make sure there's no debris inside the hub of any kind. And just being clean. And then you can use any kind of a lubricant or whatever you want to make the bearing reassembly go easier. I'm using a kind of a carburetor cleaner here. It evaporates so it doesn't leave any residue, and I'm using a socket that's the correct size of the bearing itself so that I don't hammer on the rubber part and damage the balls. And then I will turn the wheel over, and obviously I have to put the sleeve in there and making sure that that shoulder on the sleeve is properly installed in the opposite bearing, and making sure all that is correctly aligned and that the spacers are in there exactly as I had taken it apart. And then I'll very carefully align the new bearing for the opposite side so that I know it's going onto that sleeve correctly, and taking note that we have all the components in the correct order. And again, I'm just lightly lubricating this, and I'm using the plastic side of a plastic and rubber mallet. And then again, my socket just to seat the bearing finally in there. This type of a wheel I'm demonstrating with doesn't have any circlips or anything that locates the bearings. They just sit there, and then when the motorcycle is assembled, that's what prevents them from coming loose or anything like that. And there you have it. And then check to be sure that you have good rotation of your parts. The inner sleeve actually rotates with the race, the inner race of the bearings. And there you have it. Thank you for watching.